Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here, and today we're going to be talking about an update that went live on the 26th of May with the Forsaken Fortresses patch. Now, I know that some of you are waiting for a comprehensive news update, and that is in the works, but currently one of the community tools that I rely on, br.evetools.org, is undergoing maintenance, and given that that's how I try and present the larger fights to you guys in a way that makes sense, unfortunately that's been put on hold for a little bit. Thankfully, independent of the actual goings on in nullsec, this patch has had such a massive impact and caused enough controversy that I figured I could actually break it out into a standalone video and keep the stream of content to you guys going. So, Forsaken Fortresses is a patch that focuses entirely on structures, and more specifically on trying to provide an incentive to destroy them. And this has been done by the introduction of another state that Citadels can enter into, the Abandoned state, which happens when no fuel is consumed by the structure for 7 days, meaning that it's either out of fuel or was never fueled in the first place. After entering this state, Citadels no longer have any reinforcement timers, meaning that they can be destroyed by players in one sitting. They also lose the ability to tether ships, making them functionally useless as lookout posts, which is a way that low-powered structures have been used for quite some time. And most importantly of all, the structure loses its connection to the asset safety system, meaning that if it is destroyed, all of the ships, modules, blueprints, etc. that are stored in the structure by players will be spewed out into space to then be looted by the people who destroyed it or random passers-by. Now, I cannot stress enough quite how much this is a paradigm shift for those of us who don't play in wormhole space, as prior to this, all of your assets in a Citadel hangar were effectively permanently safe. You might have to pay IS to get access to them again or do a bunch of boring logistics, but fundamentally there wasn't any way that you could lose access to them. And this is because Citadels were, under their original conception, supposed to be a replacement for outposts, which for those who don't remember them, were effectively just player-built and owned NPC stations. And everyone had used these to stage from since their introduction. Because these could only be captured and not destroyed, there was an implicit asset safety built into them, which CCP felt that they needed to replicate in order to get people to be more comfortable using these new entirely destructible staging points. And you can read a lot more about CCP's mentality behind this in the dev blog I Feel Safe in Citadel City, which was written in 2015. For the past 5 years, this is just how Citadels worked, and because of that, a lot of assets have been moved into them by people who aren't currently playing the game, which means that these structures aren't likely to be fueled and thus about to drop into an abandoned state. As explored by a great article in PC Gamer by Steve Mesner, many people saw this coming in advance and prepared for it, with the main focus of that story having started up alt accounts and trained them to fly Kikimuras, with the aim of being a one-man wrecking crew. And he was able to make a pretty insane run of it, collecting over 4 trillion ISK, roughly the equivalent of 60,000 US dollars. On top of this, we've also seen unique items, things that straight up cannot be replaced, be dropped from some of the citadels destroyed in the first weeks of this patch being live, with some players picking up T2 Blueprint Originals, which were last available to players in 2007, 13 years ago, and others managing to swipe Alliance tournament ships, of which only 50 of any type exist in the game to begin with, and are handed out as prizes to the alliances that manage to make it to the top 4 of EVE's biggest esports style competition. And given that it doesn't look like the AT will ever come back, given CCP's obstinate silence on the topic, it seems unlikely that any more of them will be added. That said, these jackpot hits weren't always pure luck. In fact, a lot of people use the test server, Singularity, to look for potential targets. As the test server is a one-to-one mirror of the main live EVE server, but with upcoming mechanics implemented, this allows people to check what citadels would provide the best loot in advance in complete secrecy, which I have to say feels extremely exploitative to me just in this initial moment. And beyond that, opens up an avenue for some really unsavory things in the terms of information gathering, as there's nothing stopping anyone from, say, after the next mirror, blowing up Goon's staging citadel in FC7 and getting a head count of every single capital and super capital that the Imperium has in the theatre for effectively free. This is something that I really hope CCP does something about, and relatively quickly. In fact, I don't think I'd be opposed to just straight up temp banning people who used this to scout for either this initial rush or afterwards, as it goes against the official rules of the test server, as the PvP wasn't consensual, as someone who is uncontactable due to being AFK by definition can't consent, and is also arguably a breach of Rule 8, as it's using the test server for means that will impact the main server, thus being political. That shadiness aside though, what this change has brought with it is a massive transfer of wealth from AFK players to active ones. In fact, I expect the past couple of weeks to be very clearly visible on the MER when we get it for June, in the same way BTAC R5 is, being practically off the charts, but that'll depend on exactly how this destruction and looting is measured by the game's statistics. As such, CCP is effectively making a huge gamble with this change, with them betting that this will create a game state that's healthier enough to retain more players than they lose from the players who would consider relapsing and playing again, only to realise that all of their assets are gone and quit for good. Although it's worth noting that that won't be everyone who loses their stuff. After all, I know several people who've straight up biomassed their main character, given away all their assets, and then ended up coming back in a year or two and grinding right back up from where they were. Still, if you're a player who's not currently active, but still at least cares about the game, which I guess you do if you're watching my channel, I'd suggest quickly logging in as an alpha and booting all your stuff to Asset Safety now, which you can do remotely via the asset window. It'll take about 5 minutes at most, but give you enough of a peace of mind to not to have to worry about this kind of crap whilst you're taking a vacation. Alright, so that's the actual mechanics of the change and how everything came about, but now it's time for me to weigh in with my opinion for what it's worth. This change isn't terribly dissimilar to what I and everyone else on the council lobbied for during CSM 11 all the way back in 2016, which, after around a year of arguing with CCP on the necessity of adjusting mechanics of things like vulnerability windows and 2-week-long final timers rather than just mindlessly ploughing ahead and finishing the structure roadmap as originally laid out, became Citadels 2.0 and the low power state. So I can't really say that I'm against this idea. In fact, it's pretty evident that something like this was needed by some of the actions that we've seen outside of HiSec, with the combination of lowering the amount of effort to destroy a structure and the potential for reward in doing so, leading to things like Forsaken Empire and Deepwater Hooligans randomly killing a Fortizar branch with like 30 people, and a swathe of neglected citadels going down in Providence to equally small fleets. Before this, the fact that it was annoying and didn't really offer you anything made people not want to deal with space trash like this. But my problem really rests with the execution of this, as the asset safety problem is something that has been allowed to calcify over the past 5 years, with CCP repeatedly making moves to encourage people to live in citadels with this as a given protection. You can look at all of the tax breaks and the introduction of overpowered Reitaru bonuses for that. Taking that away with 9 days notice from the time the first devblog went live to the time that the first structure would be abandoned seems to me like an incredible lack of communication and protection for players who might, say, be deployed in the military, or dealing with the ongoing thing that I can't mention without YouTube downranking my video. That's not an argument against the change itself, it's an argument against the, quite frankly, reckless way that this change was executed, especially given that the email campaign to make lapsed players aware of this took place in the middle of a heavy CCP email campaign advertising the ongoing Chapter 3 of the Invasion storyline that's going to naturally make people tune out of these kind of updates. What I would have done as just a bare minimum to try and protect players who are taking breaks were I CCP would have been to automatically move the items of anyone who hasn't logged on in the past 30 days or so directly into asset safety. It's not an elegant solution, but it would have stopped this gold rush and meant that only people who were aware of this new mechanic could in turn fall prey to it, which I think is my biggest problem. I don't like people getting wrecked by mechanics that they didn't know were going to exist. It just seems really unfair to me, especially as someone who's taken multiple 3 to 6 month long breaks in my 10 years of playing this game where I didn't really check my EVE email that much. But what's done is done, Now, I doubt CCP is likely to roll back any of what's occurred there, and the end mechanic that we are left with is something that's a lot more healthy. Still, if you have an opinion on this change, or were one of the lucky or smart people who took advantage of it, feel free to share that in the comments below. I do always read them as they flood in, and I've been trying to reply to a few more lately. A special thanks as always goes out to our Crassuses, Brood from Northern Coalition Dot, Zolkalando and Jessica, plus 2 anonymous donors, as well as to our other $5 and above patrons in January Valentine, Big Bada Boom, Zar, Dunk Dinkle, Miss Moses, Kem, the Ashfell Celestial Academy, Closer Canty, Crazy Daisy, Ulrich Bluthers, Omniscious Shardan, Jerziabo, Marius Pontmercy, and Padrick Millar. If you want to join them in supporting the channel yourself, you can either check out the Patreon link in the description below, or if you'd like, just share the video with some other people who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.